Yes, unmute myself. Let's just try that.
You also just have video off.
I do have video off. I didn't before. Hey, that's pretty good. It's pretty wide angle, isn't it? Almost have all of you, not quite. Well, yeah, you're not in there, are you? I need to get over quite a bit. It may be that if I got it back in that corner, we'll figure it out. At any rate, we'll go back to this camera for the time being. And I will share my screen so that that's a thing. I can find the right one to share. Probably is this one. Okay. Share. And you guys are quiet today. Hide this thing. There we go. Gets me a relatively uncluttered screen. It does give me that stupid little thing. I wish I knew how to get rid of it. It just sort of pops up various times and it's not clear how you get rid of that. But there we go. All right. So as mentioned, I want to talk a little bit today about the changes in schedule. But before I do that, I'm slowing the process down. Someone mentioned time and the passage of time. Emma did. And we're slowing things down a little bit, as I mentioned in my email earlier. So originally, what we proposed to community partners is that we would begin our meetings with our community system groups next week. And I just feel like, I don't feel like we're going to be ready for that. And I don't want to push, I felt like over the weekend, I'm pushing you guys a little bit harder than I'm comfortable with. And so I don't want to push you so hard because I just feel like, I don't feel like we're going to be ready next week to do that. And so I'm going to delay that a week in the schedule. And I think that will, I think that'll work out better because it gives us more time to prep. And so I want to talk a little bit today about sort of where we are in the process. So we've talked a number of times now, we presented to the community on sort of the process we're going through. Well, I want to get a little bit more granular in talking about that process today. And in what I see as one of the key challenges in that process, which hopefully we're in the midst of kind of beginning to overcome with the work. And I've communicated this to our ICLEI partners because I felt all along like, as soon as I understood, as soon as I feel like I had a good grasp of what they actually had to offer, I had the sense that, there's a pretty big gap in in the sort of claims of how they support the process and what's actually available. And I'm quite confident that we are going to be able to overcome that challenge in this class. But I do feel like we need a little bit more time. And you guys are already, to some extent, working on that. So I want to talk a little bit about that process, again, specifically the granularity of what we're doing in this class this semester. And I kind of put it together in an email that went out to our ICLEI collaborators this morning, try to talk about it. And also, I think it's going to be something we're going to have to sort of summarize in our final report. You know, what was the specific process we undertook for the Oberlin community in producing the vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan, or at least the draft thereof, by the close of the semester. So I want to talk about that. I do want to begin to introduce Temperate, which is the modeling software that we've sort of referred to in this class, but haven't actually shown you. And I think it's going to be really instructive. So I added a little assignment. I don't actually think it's going to take that long, or it shouldn't take you that long. I'd put about 35 minutes into it. If I were you, that's what I'd ask. Between now and Thursday, for you guys to actually use the template, use the Temperate software to look at your own community. And I've inserted some instructions in the schedule on what I expect you to do. They provide 30-day sort of free licenses for Temperate. And so I'm asking you to sort of, each of you to register for a license and actually play around with it a bit. I'm not planning on us doing anything with what you produce for your home community. I just want you guys to have the same experience that Linda and I have had with their software. And I'll get to that in a second, Taylor. And just sort of like, because I think it'll give you a deeper sense into the sort of challenge and what we're going to do to overcome it today, or moving forward. I think it's going to be really useful to sort of understand what I consider to be a sort of gap in the process. Taylor, go ahead. Yes, I mean, your home community. I think it'll also be fun for you to do that, you know, give you a sense of that. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about temperate, and then I want to spend a good portion of today talking about the fine work that many of you have been engaged in sort of helping us develop this sort of fact sheet, because I've seen some really great work in that document, and I want to talk about moving forward with that work. And then a little bit about, you know, thinking about responsibilities for how we advance that that fact sheet, moving towards something that we can provide to our community partners that's going to help them help us in this process. So let me just stop there. That's kind of where I want to go today, but I want to just stop and see if there are any questions or comments or anything else. Emma, you obviously have one I can see brewing. Oh, okay. I thought you were moving your head. I thought you were going to ask something. Okay. Anyone else have anything? Bridget, you look like you might have something to say. No? Okay. Cool. All right. Good stuff. So a lot of text on these next overheads. They're not pretty overheads, but that's okay. So as I was kind of describing the Oberlin specific process to the ICLEI folks, you know, I reinforced what is true about our process, which is Oberlin, the city of Oberlin is a member of ICLEI. We followed their protocols more or less in developing the climate action plan that you guys read, in conducting the carbon inventory for Oberlin. You know, they're a good organization to be part of, because if you do things the same way that other communities do them, it allows you to learn from other communities. And hopefully, and the ICLEI people were actually really excited when we talked about this class, hopefully everyone in ICLEI is helping to develop models that will be useful for other communities in the process moving forward. So I just want to reiterate, it's very important to Linda, to me as well, to Bob, that we, to the extent possible, like follow the template, the conceptual template for conducting a vulnerability assessment and climate adaptation plan, you know, in sort of the ICLEI format. And I posted a lot of documents that I've sort of found associated with ICLEI's planning process. And I'm not sure how many of you had to take a chance to take a look at those. I'm sort of building out, and I noticed that some of you have added some good resources there as well, to that sort of resources and citations section. But one of the things I discovered that I hadn't really looked at before is they have this entire template for a report, a climate, I don't know how many of you looked at that, but it's an entire template for a climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan for a community, where basically it's got a bunch of text already in it. It's got all the section headings and everything. And I think the concept is that you can use their existing text, but, you know, obviously you adapt it as you see fit. And it's not like it, you know, obviously it has to be filled in with a lot of details. But the bottom line is we're trying to follow the ICLEI process, because we're an ICLEI community and we want to follow their process. And, you know, the fundamental element of their process is that you identify a subset of community systems you're going to look at, a subset of climate hazards, and then for each subsystem, for each community system, you evaluate each climate hazard. And that's just the way you go about doing it. So that is like a fundamental of our process. And you folks, as sort of facilitators for the community systems that we constructed, that's kind of at some level the center of your task, is to help us communicate to community members about each hazard, and then listen to them as they sort of share with you their understanding of the particular risks associated with that hazard for the system, the community system we're looking at here. And it's very important that we're all on the same page. That's kind of what we're doing this semester. So sharing their sense of risk, but also within that, also sharing their sense of adaptive capacity of that system, and specific ideas for enhancing the adaptive capacity of that system. And as you guys understand, we sort of did a little bit of a short circuit of the normal ICLEI process for this community, in the sense that Linda and Bob and I kind of decided ahead of time, okay, what system should we focus on for Oberlin and what climate hazard should we focus on for Oberlin? I think in some other communities, they have a much longer process. I mean, we're trying to do this in a very short period of time relative to how this normally works in communities. And so we figured we should just do this ahead of time so that we don't spend a lot of time like thinking about what those are going to be. So it's a bit of a short circuit in the process, but we based that on what we thought people in this community would be most interested in, what sort of leaders are already engaged in these issues, and some of the climate hazards, you don't even want to bother talking about them because sea level rise, acidification of the ocean, not really an issue for Oberlin, Ohio. Not really worth talking about a whole lot. Flooding obviously is, but not those. So like I say, our selection of those was based on kind of our knowledge of the Oberlin community, leaders willing to participate, climate hazards most relevant. It's the start of the process. We also recognize that, you have to enter this process at some point. Obviously, one of the things that Jesse made clear to us that I think we tried to make clear to our community partners is this is a circular process. You start at some point, you consider what you consider first, and then you go in a circle and, hopefully iterate as you go along. But you got to start. And I think if anything, we probably started with too many systems and too many hazards. But to start with fewer, we're already pissing off some of our community participants who are saying, like Jeff Bauman is now, who's the director of public works in Oberlin, has several times, every time he gets sent an email, he sends an email back saying, why are you combining drinking water and wastewater? They're totally separate systems. They don't belong in the same group. At which point Linda responds, yeah, we're trying to sort of like condense things a little bit. Sorry about that. We know that that's a problem, but yeah. All right, so you've seen this before. This is sort of like for Oberlin, the particular set of systems we selected, the hazards we selected, although I've already kind of nuked this last hazard because I just feel like for us around here, given that we're within 20% of the world's freshwater supply, drought is probably not worth us spending a whole lot of time thinking about in our system, just to try to simplify things. Because again, all of the systems that you guys are responsible with, the community systems, we're going to have to go through each of these and consider how they might impact that particular system. And so, we want to bring this down to a level where in the limited amount of time you're going to spend with your community partners, you're going to get some information. So simplification is probably a good thing for us to do. And at the end of the day, we want to summarize, we want to create a narrative that summarizes what we've learned from our community partners. But we're also going to have tables like this that seem to appear in every one of these vulnerability assessments, where systems are on the left. Again, these systems are not our systems. These are New Pulse's systems that they chose. Darn you. How do I get rid of this damn thing? Does anyone know? It's like it always happens in the, what's that? It just, I don't, know what it's doing there, but it's blocking my climate hazards. Anyways, that title says climate hazards underneath there. And what ICLEI expects you, what's that? Sometimes it does that too. What ICLEI, it's still there, but what ICLEI expects you to do, and you're going to experience this as you begin to go through temperate, what ICLEI expects you to do is to actually rank these impacts as, based on their potential impact and adaptive capacity, and other things too, like their probability of occurring. Like that's part of the process that you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, Bridget. Yes. Well, Bridget, you were cutting to the chase. the nub of the challenge, which is that when we first engaged with our ICLEI partners and had these discussions, we were led to believe that actually much of this information about how to do what you're asking how to do was contained within temperate. In fact, what's contained in temperate does no such thing. And that's part of our challenge. And that's why I'm slowing the process down and asking us to spend more time looking for external resources, because we were led to believe that temperate actually contained the information that was going to allow you to not necessarily decide for like a given system what's happening, but give you enough information so that you could provide that to the community participants, and they would be in a position based on scientific facts to then assess and provide you with the information to make that decision. My fear, and this is what I've been communicating to our ICLEI colleagues, is there's nothing in temperate that, I mean, there's actually quite a bit in temperate, but there's a lot that is not in temperate about, like, for instance, one of the hazards we chose was high winds. There's absolutely nothing whatsoever in temperate that provides you any data of any kind on the prediction for winds in this area and, in the future. And it turns out that there's actually, as far as I can tell, not that damn much information on predicting winds in the future. And that's where the sort of fundamental conundrum for me happens, where they've constructed this phenomenal overall process, which at the entry level makes tons of sense, and at the end level makes tons of sense that when you do this. But there's some sort of magic in between, which I think is quite unspecified, and which we need to do extra work. So that's why, I had thought, like, the fact sheets that we're now producing would mostly be data coming directly out of temperate or out of the Climate Explorer or out of other publicly available information with downscaled, localized information. And I think that's just not a reality. And to be fair, and I love the ICLEI folks. They're very cool, nice people. They're quite wonderful. But I think what we're experiencing now is something that I experienced about 20 years ago when Oberlin started doing climate inventories. When that was sort of like a thing that institutions and towns were starting to do, is figuring out what's our carbon emissions inventory, because if you're going to address climate change, on the mitigation front, you got to figure out how much you're emitting. And the reality is that we struggled for a decade in that to figure out how the heck do we get this information, because a lot of the information just wasn't that accessible. So I just want you guys to understand, and again, I'm not trying to, what the heck are you doing to me here? Stop that. I just want you guys to understand that you are in part at the bleeding edge here. We're all at the bleeding edge. And it's just a reality. In some ways, it's really cool to be at this point. It's more exciting to be at the bleeding edge than to do something that people have already done, and then there's a total format for how it's done, and everything is perfect about the process. And that's why, to some extent, where are we? Why are you putting me in a random spot within this? Sorry, I seem to my computer seems to have kind of a mind of its own here. Wow. It totally bailed me from that presentation entirely. Oh, thank you. Yes, there we go. Thanks. Right, okay. Yes. That's a really good question. That's a really, really good question. And this is partly, I had this, Linda and I are kind of in constant discussion about this stuff. And I said, what I do not want to do, we are at a point in the history of the United States where facts, and sort of we have alternate facts, or hopefully we're coming out of this period, but we sort of like brought into question this whole concept of basing our decision-making process on a scientific fact gathering process. And what I do not want to do, and why I'm making such a fuss about us creating fact sheets in which we are actually citing our sources, is I do not want to be part of a process where we are, pardon my language here, pulling information out of our behinds when we do these sorts of things. I just feel like if we don't know, we should say we don't know. I don't want to be in a process of saying, what's our guess about this? Because the whole concept behind this vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan is that it's supposed to be based on scientific fact. Like, let's deliver the facts to the community, and then let's have the community help us figure out what we do with those facts. That's what I want this process to be about. And I still want it to be about that, even though I discovered that, we were kind of sold this idea that the downscaled modeling data in temperate was a little bit more fleshed out than it actually is. It's got great data on some things, but no data on other things. So that's just the reality of where we are. And that's kind of what I'm trying to communicate to you today and what we're trying to work through and figure out. Just puts a little bit more onus on us and allows us to be a little bit more creative, not in making up information, but in figuring out how we move forward with uncertainty. And of course, that's what dealing with climate change is all about. It's about dealing with uncertainty and try to create the greatest degree of certainty you can about what's known about the future, and then communicating that to people and having those people help you figure out, okay, given this reality and this level of uncertainty, what do we want to do as a community to make us, to prepare us for what we know is going to happen or think could happen, and how do we adapt and ultimately make ourselves resilient? But yeah, that's my big question for ICLEI is how are you selecting those? Where are those coming from? So it is obviously partly coming back from the community, but ideally it's coming back from a community that has been delivered good scientific facts, which they're basing that on. I think it's absolutely unfair to expect community members who have no particular expertise in climate change, most of them, to be able to, to come up with these without us providing them with some sort of information. And Phoebe, and I guess her entire group, asked this really important question last night, which I answered this morning, and hopefully you guys saw this, because I think there really is this line here. What we're trying to do, and this is important to ICLEI, but it's also really important to Oberlin, is we're trying to provide the community, we being us organizers, are trying to provide the community with sufficient scientific information that they can then communicate to us what they think about the risks and what they think about adaptation. And so Phoebe was asking the important questions. Is this just about presenting facts, or to what extent should we be inferring information about these facts? And I think there's some gray area there. And that's where I think we all need to work together to try to figure out what is that, because we don't want to over-specify. Our job is not to teach the community, what the risks are or the adaptation opportunities are. Our main goal is to give them the facts and learn from them, so that the document we ultimately produced is reflective of the knowledge and wisdom and ideas of our community partners, rather than sort of our own ideas superimposed on theirs. Does that make sense? Any questions or comments on that? Again, I'm kind of sharing with you. Yeah, Claire. That's Claire, that's the thing we're trying to figure out here, is what is the level. And I think it is suggestive of implications, but not specific to implications for Oberlin. So let's take some examples to get specific here. So some places that we have really good data that I think are easy, the places where we have the strongest data are things like related to electricity, for instance. That seems like one for the electricity group or the energy group in general. We've got great data. We've got heating degree days, we've got cooling degree days, we've got extreme heat days. All of those things are very, very closely related to inferences you can draw to help the community have a discussion. So in that case, like, let's say we're citing the increased number of heating degree days that are predicted for Oberlin. Perfectly fair to say it's not just about those are going to influence the air conditioning load, to make that statement, which is an inference based on a graph of heating degree days. Heating degrees are inherently kind of about energy, so it's not very far to sort of like make that added point. Frankly, the people in that group already know that. The people who are the community participants already know that heating degree days are directly related to air conditioning, but nothing wrong with like saying that, even though the graphs obviously aren't saying that. It's very easy to say, it has an implication for that. So to include in your facts what you think it has implications for in a particular system seems like the right level to me, although I'm open to discussion about that. To say, you know, I noticed some of you are really interesting and creative in thinking about disease. We're thinking about, for instance, you know, some very indirect causality, but the causality that extends through, you know, drinking water and algal blooms in Lake Erie and that sort of thing. I will say about that particular one, right now, Oberlin's source of water is not Lake Erie. So algal blooms in Lake Erie are not a particular problem for the city of Oberlin. Although ironically, they are a problem for me because the New Russia Township surrounding Oberlin gets our water from Lake Erie, but the city of Oberlin gets it from the West Branch of the Black River, which yeah, you saw that in the earlier reading, which is, you know, drains into Lake Erie, but is not Lake Erie. So toxic algal blooms probably not a problem for city of Oberlin, but yeah. So if you're going to using just that as an example, so toxic algal blooms affecting disease, great stuff in a general sense. Again, maybe not quite specific to Oberlin, but great stuff in a general sense. But like pointing that out. So I think listing the potential implications, but not over specifying those for Oberlin. Do people feel like they can sort of calibrate with that little bit of gray there? You know, so pointing them towards like, this is why this fact that I just said is important. You know, here are some reasons that we will want to think about as a group, but not telling them what they should do with it. Yeah, Taylor. Right. Right. Yeah. And I will say about the clay soils, that's not unique to Oberlin. That's Northeast Ohio writ large. So that's a larger thing, which is obviously has implications for Oberlin, but is not kind of like a unique attribute of Oberlin. But yeah. And I think part of our job is to sort of edit each other's work so that we come up with a set of facts that are consistent among groups. So right now, I've asked you to focus specifically on your particular areas. I also created that. I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself and talking about the assignment. Maybe I won't go there yet. I think I think we want to talk about it further, but it's all good stuff to think about. So I'm just going to keep on going through the Oberlin specific process. And by the way, I will share this with you soon. I just feel like it's a little bit early. So I told you about like ICLEI has this particular template for communities. Linda and I are in the process of creating a template for our report, which will certainly draw on their template, but you know, is very much targeted towards the city of Oberlin. And so what I'm showing you here on the overhead has basically been inserted into that document as like, this is the process we're following in Oberlin as we do this thing. So, you know, as you know, we solicited participation from leaders in the community. We talked with you about this a little bit, but I just want to reiterate, you know, how we selected people because it's important to understand the people in your group because some of them fall into different categories. One category of people is people with stakeholder involvement. So for instance, if you're going to talk about water, you damn well want to have the director of public works in Oberlin involved in your group. And I've mentioned Jeff Bauman as that person. And that's why Jeff's in there. He's not actually that psyched to be part of this process, but if he's not part of the process, nothing useful will end up being implemented in Oberlin. He needs to be part of the process. Otherwise, there's no chance of it being implemented. And when you think about these sorts of projects in communities, you really need to think about how you're inviting, who you're inviting, and who's going to be able to. First of all, you want to invite people so that you really are representative of the community, but you also want to invite decision makers, you know, people who are actually involved in implementation. Otherwise, and this has been my experience with many reports that I've been involved in creating, if you don't fully align participants with decision makers, what you end up with is reports that sit on a shelf and nothing ever happens to them. And I can't tell you how many reports I've been involved with just at Oberlin College that have sat on the shelf and resulted in absolutely nothing, even though enormous resources went into producing these reports. A lot of them related to climate change. And I'll say, when I got here in 2020, my colleague David Orr invited Rocky Mountain Institute, one of the premier, environmental think tanks in the country, to work with Oberlin College on producing something that was called the 2020 report for Oberlin College. And it was effective in the sense that institutions around the country looked at it as a model for beginning to do climate action plans. It was before there was any such thing as a climate action plan. It was, the concept was Oberlin College would think through and create a report to consider how we could become climate neutral by 2020. And it was wonderful. We had people from all over the country coming in to sort of talk with us and work with us on this. We were very far ahead of the curve. The one set of people who were actually not at all on board with this report were, who do you think? The Oberlin administration. Wasn't all on board with the report. So we had the whole nation looking at this great model we were creating here at Oberlin College for doing this work, but we didn't actually have buy-in from the administration here at Oberlin College. And so we produced this wonderful report that was widely cited throughout the country, but that Oberlin College didn't do shit with. Now you can say that sucks. You can say that. In fact, I think sometimes you need to produce those reports to sort of poke people into later on doing stuff, because I mean that may well have been the critical step in all subsequent action that really the administration was on board with. And I often feel like, how many of you guys know who David Orr is? We do a little bit of reading of him in 101. He's sort of a major figure in the environmental studies movement, not just in the United States, internationally. He's probably the most famous faculty member of Oberlin College, really quite an incredible human being in terms of being a visionary on climate change in particular, but environmental education generally. He's responsible for this building that you're in right now. He did all the fundraising for this building. The college basically said to David said, we need a new environmental studies center. And they said, you can build one, but here's the deal. You can't raise money from anyone who's ever given money to Oberlin College before, or is likely to give money to Oberlin College. So no alumni, nothing else. You can't get any money from them. Thinking that would shut him down and basically, that would be the end of that. We'd be done with that one. And give David a few months and he'd raise $7 million to build this building. He's that kind of guy. Anyway, I think when I think of David Orr, I think of this metaphor of him like gathering a group of people and taking them way out on a limb, where basically you're going to either get something done or you're going to fall off. And I feel like he's done that at many points with Oberlin. He did that with the building. He did that with the 2020 report. And it's one strategy for getting movement forward, is you, ahead of what an institution or an organization might be ready for, you go ahead and do that thing, and you create this thing. You create a lot of outside media focused on what you're doing here. And at the end of the day, it may be about embarrassment. You end up embarrassing the organization actually doing something. I had this similar experience with a grant that I was working on, where I was having, we got this great $812,000 grant from the Great Lakes Protection Fund to begin developing environmental dashboard as a tool for other communities a bunch of years ago. Anyway, I was having a conversation with our grant officers at the Great Lakes Protection Fund. And I said, it's really frustrating working with our city people. They don't seem to have any interest in moving forward on this, even though they were partners on the grant. And what he said to me is, give them all awards. Give them all awards for the good work they're doing, and then you'll put them in a position where they really can't say no. And we didn't actually do that, but that's sort of aligned with the strategy I'm talking about. Give people awards for doing good things, and then it's really hard for them not to do more good things if you give them awards. Even if they don't really want to be doing those good things, as soon as they do a good thing, congratulate them and celebrate them for it. And it makes it really hard for them to backpedal on it. These are sort of political strategies. All of that is a bit of an aside, because that's not what we're trying to do in this process. In this particular process, what we want to do is actually get people, the stakeholders, people like Jeff Bauman, who are important decision makers, and if they aren't on board, it's not going to happen. Yeah, you guys are close to that window. You're safe. You're safe inside. All right. So moving on, obviously we want to get people in the community who also know something about systems. Sometimes those are the stakeholders themselves. Sometimes they're other people. We have local people in this community with a variety of different expertise who might not be decision makers, but are in fact quite knowledgeable. I'll give you an example. I know no one showed up for the water group in our first meeting, but Pete Richards is a good example of that. The guys are, we talked about the different people in groups, but he's a biogeochemist, geographer who's focused on water for his career. So he's a good person to have in the water group because he knows a lot about water and movement through landscapes. He's a, scientific authority on it. So no particular authority in Oberlin in terms of decision making, but lots of authority in terms of knowledge. And then, of course, I think all of us are extraordinarily cognizant at this particular day and age, given this last year and everything that came before it, of, the really key aspect of dealing with diversity within communities. So, Linda and I put a lot of effort to making sure that we were inviting people who, people of color from different groups within the community to make sure that this was honest to God going to be a representation of this very wonderfully diverse community we have in Oberlin. And it is a wonderfully diverse community. It's one of the coolest things about this community is our being a little small Western town that just has an enormous degree of diversity within it, which again is one of the coolest. And I think one of the factors that actually at the end of the day is going to make Oberlin most resilient. I think if you believe that diversity is strength, we've got it. All right. So as you guys know, we ended up with about 35 participants and about 5 people each of our system groups. Okay, so let's talk about in engagement and let me get rid of this damn thing again. It's blocking my screen. Hide floating control panel. Okay, and now you're going to give me that stupid move away thing again, but okay. So I want to talk about you guys, and your role in this. So this is one thing that makes our process really quite unique in this Oberlin thing, and that ICLEI was super excited about when we sort of, began talking with them about this last summer. The idea about engaging students in it. There are many ICLEI communities that have colleges and universities in them. So, and no one has done what we're doing now. So they were super excited about, hey, you guys might develop some sort of cool model of how you could do this process and engage students in it, and that could be a really cool thing for other communities to do. So I don't think I'm going to put up anything here that you don't already know, but I want to talk about your roles in this class. So you guys are collaborators, obviously, in developing this climate action plan. I mean, not climate action plan, this vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. That's not just climate action plan. And you've got a bunch of different roles in the process. Like with this assignment, you're kind of in the fact finder role, but obviously you've played the facilitator role and you're going to play a report writing role in this. So you've got kind of a key role in this process. Obviously, Linda and I, and to a little bit lesser extent, Bob, are, managing this process. So it's important for you to understand that, at some level, this is modeling a professional process. You guys are kind of working for us. So, we're calling the shots, but your input is absolutely key, critical to this process here. You guys are central to this process, and we've created groups, and you guys are assigned to work with 2 community groups. Again, there's nothing up here you don't already know, just sort of documenting the process. And we're asking you to develop some of this expertise. That's part of what you're doing in this assignment you're working on now, is developing expertise in that expertise in the hazards, specifically as they relate to the community groups you've been, the community system groups that you've been assigned to, so that you can help them in sharing information with you. You can provide them with input that will allow them to better share information. And so within those groups, again, you're developing and sharing relevant scientific knowledge about climate risks. You're engaging community participants in discussion to try to gather information from them. And you're documenting the knowledge and ideas of participants with respect to perceptions of the impacts of each climate hazard and adaptation capacity and options. So yes, nothing I've said up here is a surprise to you. Is that true? Okay, so you guys are fully aware that that's your role here. So I have this one asterisk because this is where I feel like it's step number 3 in the unique Oberlin process, which is where I feel like, you know, I began to run into some cognitive dissonance. And that is the assumption going into this was that Temperate Climate Explorer and other easily accessible resources would provide us with a basis for developing a science-based factual information to share with community members. And that's what I've sort of really come to realize is the assumption that was not quite fully true. But, you know, nevertheless, if we want this to be a scientific-based process, as it was conceived to be, you know, it is our job to sort of organize and summarize relevant scientific information so that it can be easily shared and digested by community participants as key input to discussions of climate hazard impacts and adaptive capacity for each community system. And that's, you know, that's again at the heart of your role, is to get together with them, get that information to them in a way in which we can then have these discussions with them. All right. You guys are all, by the way, shared on this. I'm putting all of our notes on every presentation in class into one document, which was shared on the first day. So you guys have this. It's just sort of further along in the overheads that were shared for the first day. So there's nothing here. Okay, so community input. So what we expect from community members is we expect to engage the participants in each of our community system groups in a discussion regarding their perception of risks, adaptive capacity for each hazard in each system. So that's what we're doing with them in the 2 meetings that you will have with them, the meetings that are sort of group-wide and the individual conversations with them. They're all focused on doing that one thing, not on doing other things, but on getting their sense of risks, adaptive capacity, and for each of these particular hazards in each system. That's our job. And again, we've got these 2 additional points of contact, really 3, because we've got the meetings, which will now occur 2 weeks from this week on Tuesday and Thursday. And I'll talk a little bit about how those will be structured well, maybe I'll say it now. So if you were to look on the syllabus now, what you would see is a slight rearrangement in time, but on Tuesday and Thursday, not next week, but the week after that, on Tuesday, we're going to break into different groups that focus on 4 of the system groups. So we're going to meet with 4 of the system groups on Tuesday and 3 of the system groups. We have 7, right? And 3 of the system groups on Thursday. And Linda and I are going to split ourselves. So each of us will be with one group. So for that initial discussion, you guys are doing the facilitation, but Linda and I will also be in those groups with you for those discussions. And the goal will be to sort of, you know, basically take them through as much as we can, figuring out what their particular concerns are in terms of risks associated with each climate hazard and adaptive capacity associated with each climate hazard in each particular group. Does that make sense? Yes, everyone on board with that? And then for a good part of the rest of the semester, you'll be interviewing, and we'll figure out exactly how to do this, whether it's 1 of you or 2 of you involved in these interviews, but basically interviewing individual members of these groups. And I think I have this. For the one-on-one interviews, there are some additional people who volunteered to participate in this process, but didn't want to be part of the overall process. I'll give you some examples. Many of you know Mary Garvin in biology. She's actually an expert on disease ecology. So, you know, she said she was not up for participating in the whole process, but would be happy to meet with students to talk about, you know, local disease ecology as it relates to that. So, you know, there's an example of probably people in the health group. People in the health group are going to want to interview. And she said she was up for it. And then on the business side, Leo Brado, who owns IGA, said he was too busy to participate in the whole process, but would be happy to be interviewed. Good interview on both the food system side and the local business system side. So might have some people from both of those groups involved in interviewing him. Okay, so getting to the sort of tail end of this, so out of these discussions with community leaders, we're going to develop a draft report, and that's going to consist of both narratives describing what we learned from people and those kinds of tables that we had up on the screen before, hopefully identifying places where we really have no basis for assessing a risk in terms of its probability. And then we're going to make a presentation, and that's on the schedule. That date's not going to change for that final presentation. And then based on any feedback we get at that, we'll make further revisions to that and figure out what are sort of next steps in the process. Because we said at the start of this semester that the process is not going to end this semester. We're doing the hard part. We're doing the kickoff of this, and presumably by the end of the semester, we'll have made some mistakes and figured out some really good stuff and kind of have a good sense of where this process should go next. And you guys are going to have played this sort of critical element of getting us to that point where the Oberlin community is now engaged in a vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan, and we will have ideas about what's next in that, and we'll begin the loop on that one. All right, I'm gonna stop there. And I've already kind of talked about the revision to the schedule, so I don't know that I need to go to the schedule to show you that. And I'll just shut up for a second and just let people ask questions or throw out thoughts on this, on where we are. So Elizabeth, this is that moment that we talked about yesterday, where you're at that point So Elizabeth and I met yesterday to talk a little bit about facilitation. Elizabeth was hoping for some pointers on facilitation, because that's a key role that you guys are playing this semester, is as facilitators. And since our goal is to get people in the community sharing ideas, but ideas that are targeted specifically towards the hazards and the risks associated with that hazards and the adaptive capacity associated with that hazards, it's going to be very important for you guys to be sort of prepped to, in these discussions, keep them focused on that, but also provide them with the opportunity to share what it is they want to share in a particular environment. And so I was suggesting that one strategy is to think really carefully about, if there's a dead moment, like what questions you might want to ask that would get you back on that particular track as a facilitator. Like, how do you prep for that moment if there's silence in your group and no one's kicking in? How do you kickstart that discussion? So, I mean, honestly, as someone who is a former Quaker, I think being comfortable with silence is not a bad thing, but you don't want huge, because out of silence often comes interesting and good comments when people reflect on things. But you also don't want too much silence, because it makes people feel uncomfortable and doesn't lead anywhere. So I'm going to go back into silence and see if anyone has a thought they want to share on this process, or things that they're thinking about. Yeah.
Something I was wondering about is the capacity with which we can ask people about previous experiences with these hazards, or provide some context for
right,
because we haven't lived through
right,
some of the problems that
right.
will be predicted. So I think it might be helpful for both parties to talk about. I mean, unless they don't want to share.
Right.
It might be hard to talk about some intense storms that may have happened in the past, but question about like, what's a time when you experienced a hazard and, you know, you saw it affect your sector, or like, can you tell us a story of like, yeah.
I think that's great. Did everyone hear, everyone heard that? You guys heard that okay back there?
This is
Claire, you're
Linda.
not-
No, I didn't hear it.
Hey, Linda, you're there. My God. You suddenly appear like God. We didn't know you were here.
Yeah, I'm a little bit like God, but I'm actually feeling kind of terrible. So I'm not going to video myself. I hope nobody saw that quick little glimpse, but I am listening. But I didn't hear the questions or comments from the students.
Hey, you know what? Now that I know you're on, I may repeat them a little bit because I don't know if I have the microphone plugged in for this room, and I'm afraid if I do plug it in right now,
It's okay. You can just repeat it.
Okay. So Phoebe was pointing out something that I think is actually crucial, and I think this is part of our work next week. Actually, is to come up with these questions, come up with a set of questions that. So Phoebe's question was basically, to what extent should we be asking community members about their past experiences with disasters that might be relevant to the predicted hazards in the future? And I think the simple answer to that is, although it's not a yes and no question, I think the answer is still yes to that question, which is, yeah, totally. We want to be doing that. But I think that's the kind of thing that would make a lot of sense for our groups to think about, in particular related to hazards. So within the health group, thinking about what questions you might ask about health crises. I mean, obviously the pandemic itself provides a lot of stuff. Emma. Right. Yeah, this actually, it's good we have Linda on now. So Linda, did you hear Emma on that one or not?
No, I didn't.
Okay. So Emma was saying, hey, do we have any hazard plans for the city of Oberlin that you could share with us? Basically was the gist of her question. And I think, so I don't know how much you've looked at like the fact sheets we put together, or the resources at the bottom of that, the resources to be cited. But that's, did you get that from Bob? Because the answer is yes, it exists, but.
Yep. I don't know if you shared it or not. It's a summary. The actual very large document is confidential, but there is a summary that is open to the public.
Okay, did you send that to me? Somehow that must have escaped my email.
I think that Bob sent it to both of us, but I can find it.
Yeah, because we definitely want to put a link to that and any other Oberlin specific resources that we have.
I want to add something.
Yeah, go.
So when we were talking to our fire chief, Bob Hemner, he lives in an emergency services world, and he wasn't quite sure what, the leap from that to a vulnerability assessment. So how we bridge that gap is talking about a chemical scare that happened last year or the year before in Oberlin. So I'm like, Bob, so, who came? How did that roll out? And are those people that we should be inviting? And so that helped him think about, the county's involvement and the health department's involvement. And so the answer, I think, to Phoebe's question is yes, bringing in any examples of real life is super helpful.
Yeah.
And, Texas, everybody's talking about Texas, right?
Right. I think at some level, both of you are sort of on it here, where, like, I think the challenge with climate change and getting people to think about this sort of existential future crisis is simply making the connections. And that's about like past experiences and other hazards. I mean, of course, the Texas one is kind of directly related to climate change. It is a climate change situation in Texas that they're experiencing, altered Gulf Stream, pushing cold air down, creating, hazards affecting the electrical and water systems in a big way. But I think absolutely those connections are things we want to be building into questions. And again, looking towards next week, I think this week we still want to focus on gathering factual information. Next week, we want to shift to what are the right questions to ask. And I think Phoebe and Emma are absolutely on it. We want to ask questions that relate to past experiences that connect with climate change. Again, everything has to be focused on getting down this list of hazards, of climate hazards, as they relate to particular systems, because that's how we're trying to organize our thinking. But what are the questions that accomplish that? You know, and I think you're totally on it. And what are the local resources which might not relate to climate change? They might be hazard plans which don't even mention climate change, but obviously they have information about how, you know, this community deals with hazards. You know, so yes, and for many of our people, exactly as Linda is saying, you know, you would think, well, it's kind of obvious. You think it should be obvious to Bob about, yeah, we're going to have a lot of hazards in the future associated with climate change, but it's still like a little bit of a leap for, I think, most people in most communities. Like Linda said at the beginning, when we ask people to participate, the first thing they say is, I don't know anything about this, and I don't know that I have anything to contribute to it. You know, and they're saying that in the context of a situation in which climate change is going to affect every aspect of our lives in the future. So that connection just hasn't quite been made by most people. And you guys are going to help make that connection with your questions. Why are you guys so damn quiet? You must be thinking things. What are you thinking? Yes. Yeah.
Difference between a hazard is like a given like emergency situation and event, like responding in like just a quick time period, like oh a day or a week or something like that, versus like a more longer term or just something that like lasts a year or lasts however like I don't know if that's relevant, but it just made me think about like the difference between what a hazard is and like how it's different if it's like more chronic versus like an event.
Yeah, and I think to the extent possible, I mean, it's a good question, but to the extent possible, we absolutely want to stick with the 7 hazards. Yes, 7 because we nuked drought. The 7 hazards here, but to directly answer your question, these have both long-term and acute implications. And I think you want to be dealing with both long-term and acute. Like, again, going back to electricity for a second, you need to build infrastructure to deal with increased summer demand for electricity. You know, you've got to have basically bigger pipelines in the form of bigger wires to deliver more electricity because the demand is higher. That's just sort of an infrastructure thing that's about long-term planning. But then you've got the problem of, okay, when you do have a blackout, you know, what do you do? Which is sort of a more acute situation. So I think that these hazards need to embody both of these things, if that makes sense. Am I answering your question? Okay, yeah. Yes. That's a good question. Okay, so I'll repeat some of these because I'm not sure Linda's hearing. So Ian just asked the question, who's our target audience for this? And I think there are 2 target audiences. For right now, and I don't think they're actually that different. For right now, our target audiences are the people in the groups we're interacting with, because our sole goal right now is to stimulate good discussion that gets their ideas out and in a way that fits within our climate hazard. So they're our first target audience. But frankly, the people we have involved in this process are a pretty good cross-section of the Oberlin community. So if we're looking at a report, we certainly want the report. And I think looking at the climate action plan that you guys read for first class, I think that's a pretty good example of a document that was written in a way that is readable by any member of the community and should make sense to them. So anyone could really read that document and make sense out of it. There's nothing in it that's super technical. But yeah, I think this point is really important. Thinking about our target audiences, our immediate target audience are the people we're trying to extract and elicit information from in our community system groups. But ultimately, our goal is to produce a document which is relevant to people in organizations, people in city government. Linda, do you have anything else to say about that?
I think you're spot on.
All right, Elizabeth.
We can react to other things that are happening and like as for example, like new spaces being used now with flooding and stuff like that. Like, do you just want us to include how companies will negatively impact systems, or do you want us to include like stuff about how these systems can react to encounter other parts of climate change? If that makes sense.
Okay, so I think Elizabeth, and you should correct me if I don't get this right, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is asking about the extent to which we're focusing on vulnerabilities versus the extent to which we're focusing on adaptive capacity and opportunities. Is that a decent summary? Yeah, and I think, and this is partly because Linda's kind of pushed me a little bit in this direction. I think our first priority is vulnerabilities and our second priority is adaptive capacity, but I actually think both are pretty important. Linda, what's your take on it?
Yeah, so the vulnerability assessment is kind of the mandate of the thing you do first. And so that's why we are focused in on that. We've gotten a little pushback already about not including, everyone. And of course that is impossible. So there will be an extended process where once we have a draft vulnerability assessment, we can build on that and work more on the adaptive process. So yes, I mean, obviously that's going to come out in these groups, but I think in my feeling is the priority remains the vulnerability assessment.
To say that as someone who's interested in this sort of social, psychological, and communication dimension of this, I feel like to talk about doom and gloom without talking about opportunity for addressing doom and gloom is not good. So for me, I see them as really coupled, but Linda's sort of a little bit more in the driver's seat than I am. We both got wheels, but she's a little bit more in the driver's seat. So I do defer to her, position on that. But for me, it's like, I wouldn't want to engage people in a discussion about what's wrong with the problems, without also engaging with them in the solutions.
No, I mean, I agree that we obviously do want to include that, but we also are going to have to pull and work harder at getting a broader audience, if you will, of participants for that.
Yeah. And we've made very clear, we are in the beginning stages, probably the hardest stages, probably the most creative stages, probably the most uncertain stages. Once we've been through this semester, we're going to know a lot of stuff we didn't know at the start. I already know a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And I think then we'll be in a great position to really figure out next steps that are in some ways more inclusive. I mean, you couldn't be that damn inclusive in the first step because you get too many people involved and you get nothing done. I think we're at a pretty good level here in terms of number of people involved. We had some particular. I'll be more direct than Linda's indirect comment about comments, very friendly comments we received about inclusiveness of the process. And one member who's actively participating in the process said, "I noticed I'm not seeing religious leaders in this." And the response was, "Well, actually, we've very explicitly invited a bunch of pastors, and they just decided not to participate in the process. They chose not to participate, but it's important." I mean, their point was partly, churches are really important in this community, and they're potentially places, spaces where People might, some of the churches might actually be good places to be in a crisis situation and that sort of thing. So, it's a very good, well-meaning point, well taken. But yeah, we're limited in what we're doing, and we're not completely inclusive. That's known. Yes. Jane, you want to say something? No, you look like you did. All right, cool. Let's see, where were we in this? We talked about your role. We talked about that problem. We talked about engaging. I think we're more or less done with what I wanted to say about the process. So I do want to talk a little bit about temperate and just give you guys a beginning introduction. And you guys all have computers in front of you, don't you? So let's just take a moment to get onto temperate so that I can at least walk you through the beginning process of this. And so I'm taking you up on your suggestion, Linda. I don't know if you're seeing
Cool.
that. Okay, so what you want to do, and there are some limited instructions in our assignment for this, but type in temperate.io, which is their, they have an IO extension, not .org, but .io. And if you type in temperate.io, you're actually going to get to a different space than I'm going to get right now. So maybe I will actually, for a moment, go incognito, because I think that'll allow me to, it's auto-loading my password because it knows who Linda and I are. And so let's try this. For some reason, it knows that I want to go to temperate, but it's going to be smart enough, I think, not to enter my password. Yes. Okay. So this is what everyone in the class is looking at. Is that right? So you want to go ahead and go try for free and enter your information here. Oops, I'm not sharing this screen. I have two separate screens. This one. No, you'll be fine using your Oberlin email address. It'll be fine. I'm not sharing this. Am I sharing this? No, I'm not sharing this. It's not that green around it.
I don't see it yet.
There. Okay, so this is the interface, if you remember, Linda, way back when we first entered stuff in here, which we can't see anymore. Now you guys will enter that in there. It'll send you an email and with some information. So enter a simple password for yourself that you're going to remember. It's not like anyone's going to steal this account from you. So use the simplest possible one for yourself. And then you're gonna go to an interface. And I actually haven't been to the interface you're going to go to in a while because I can't really. I mean, I could create another account for myself, but I don't really want to do that. So you're going to go to something that in which it asks you information about your local community that you need to enter in the process. And we're not going to go through all this right now. I just wanted to get you guys started in class, and then I'll take you to the version of temperate that let's close that one, and I will share my other temperate screen, which won't look quite like yours because you have to enter a bunch of information that we've already entered. Now, so this is the temperate interface. And again, our goals in having you look at temperate is not because we're going to have you using temperate. And I'll be honest, and Linda and I have gone back and forth on this. I think for our purposes that I don't really have a whole lot of interest in using temperate. I mean, they've designed this as a tool where you can enter all your information into temperate and it'll spit out some graphics at the end. And I just feel like, I personally feel like it's actually a very constraining software, and I'd rather do it outside of temperate because if you do it in temperate, it's harder to share it with other people. We can't share it with you. So I think for the purposes, especially in this class, I don't anticipate actually using it, but as a concept of what we're doing, as a tool that has been developed for other communities, I think it's very instructive to at least go through the process so you understand how they've constructed it. So you will eventually have a dashboard like this that you see in front of you. Linda, are you looking at my screen right now? You are, aren't you?
Yep.
I just can't think again. It's really irritating the way these controls are always on top of stuff. Right. So the climate data section, basically, it will eventually be populated with what you select as your hazards. So these hazards are what we selected for Oberlin. These little things here. And for many of these hazards, it doesn't actually have anything in it. Like for severe winds, it's just kind of empty. But it doesn't even matter what it has in terms of your hazards. Below your hazards, it's going to give you all of the climate data that it has in its brain, right? So again, this is this sort of downscaled climate data from large climate models, which is specific to the region that you enter. So when you enter your home zip code, this is climate data for Oberlin, Ohio, and yours is going to say climate data from, you know, Columbia, Indiana, or wherever the heck you're from, Boston, Massachusetts, whatever it is. And it's going to give you all of the data that it has in its brain here. And honestly, and so you could click on any of these particular things, average high temperatures, which is a graph we've looked at, and it'll give you some choices that you can look at here. And it by default only looks at like a rather limited time scale. And it's reloading here. So I always click on more dates so I can see an expanded time range and extend it all the way from 1950 to 10. Let me say this. I actually think the data visualizations in temperate are not nearly as good as the data visualizations in Climate Explorer. And it doesn't, as far as I can tell, have a whole lot in it that Climate Explorer doesn't also have. I think they're pretty much redundant to each other. So frankly, I don't find this section as useful as Climate Explorer. And so in our presentation, all of our graphs came from Climate Explorer because among other things, Climate Explorer lets you display low and high emissions on the same graph. And in this one, you can display low emissions or high emissions, but not both at the same time. So you can't compare scenarios, which to me is a real glitch in their data visualization, because of course you want to be able to compare those two. And if you switch from one to the other, you've got to change the damn timescales again to be what you want it to be. So again, this is all of the data they have. There's no surprise data hidden someplace else. All of their data are in this climate data thing. And so if you have selected severe winds, and you go down through this climate data and you notice there's actually nothing whatsoever in their data set on severe winds, and that makes you scratch your head. It makes me scratch my head too. It's not there. So they give you the option of exploring the impact of severe winds, but they give you no data on severe winds. All right, but you will, in the process for next class, we're asking you to select 2 systems and 2 hazards, just for the heck of it, to explore them, see what you can do. But what you're gonna see when you go in there, my computer's being frustrating here. My trackpad is being irritating. It's not letting go. Okay, so if you go to dashboard, what you're going to see is the way this is organized is you can look at an overview, which shows you the particular hazards you chose. So it's got our 7 hazards in it. It's actually got 8 hazards in it. And I could click on assess any of those hazards. So if I slide down to, let's say, severe wind and click assess, it's going to let me look at things by severe wind. And so it's going to say, okay, here's each of my systems. These are the systems I chose. And I could choose to assess those. So if I'm in community and culture, I might want to assess the effect of wind on community culture. And that's what I would do by clicking the assess button here. And you're going to see it's got the hazard and it's got the system at risk. So these are you're looking at the risk is the convergence of the hazard, severe wind, and the system, community culture. And on this page, it's just sort of like saying, okay, this is what you're looking at. And then you could click on hazard. And here is where you would do the magic that Bridget was asking about earlier. And I would just sort of say, okay, I think there's the probability of this happening is such and such. And you might ask the question, where's this information coming from? And I would answer, I don't know. I don't know. That's what you guys are trying to do, is get us some data so we can answer this, because it's not intemperate, that data. And then, you know, how often do you expect this hazard to occur in the next few years? You know, which one of these do we select? I don't know. And how intense do you expect this hazard to be in the next 5 years? So that's how temperate is organized, so that once you've filled all this stuff out, and potential impact, so it's another set of choices that you select. But that's where those tables are coming from in that final report, is like when you go through this process, it will spit out those tables. Like I say, I don't envision us as a class using this because it's all in, you know, just would be hard to do. And I don't find the interface that useful. But here's where you'd actually sort of be describing information about the potential impact and about the adaptive capacity. That's just narrative stuff. But you're selecting, that table you saw is just someone selecting these things. Hopefully they selected them based on some factual basis, but it's just them being selected. And then it would spit all, I'm not selecting these things because maybe we will do something with this at some point, but does that make sense? Do you guys understand how this thing works now? It's a great concept. It's really just a wonderful concept. But the missing data is what we switch to next, which is the fact sheet. All right. Since Bridget is getting up and stretching and going to the bathroom, we'll take a slight break here for a moment and just let people do their thing. No, we're not doing it. We're letting you do it. I'm just sensing that there might be a need to do that. If you guys want to stretch for a minute, go ahead and do that before we get into this. For the temperate? Yeah, you guys don't need to be anonymous. Ian, be public about it. Oh, they want an organization, right? Be the Climate Vulnerability and Adaptation Planning Assessment Team. How did your presentation go, Linda?
Yeah, it went well. I was pleased.
Was there decent turnout for it?
There were like 25 people, so it wasn't fabulous, but it was okay. I think the best part is that there were lots of people there I didn't know, so it was a new audience.
Were you presenting your sort of climate action plan presentation, or?
A little bit that, and then just talking about sort of the intersection of social justice and equity. And so, yeah, it was kind of that, but more focused on social equity. Yeah, it was interesting. People were starting to talk sort of towards the end, but it wasn't the most vocal group.
You had the disadvantage in being in the first one of those things. Hopefully they'll kind of like.
Yeah, I think, and they really just put it out yesterday, so.
Well, they just firmed us up. Like, I don't know about you, but they just firmed me up this weekend, so.
Yeah, so I mean, pretty good attendance for the invite going out yesterday.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like an hour before my presentation, I started getting like body aches and chills, and now I have a fever and I'm kind of freaked out about it.
That's a bummer.
Of course, you know, the fear of COVID.
Of course. I'll tell you, I keep on like getting colds and stuff like that, and I'm like, how is that possible? I like have no contact with anyone.
Yeah. You know, my only hope is that Eli, my son, had the flu pretty bad, and he not COVID, but of course that was, you know, weeks ago that I saw him. Right. But boy, feels like the flu to me, and that of course is also COVID, every symptom. So I'm a little freaked out.
Yeah, well, hang in there.
Yeah. What else did I need to ask you? Oh,
I did revise the syllabus with dates. So if you want to like, with like the particular, maybe I'll stick that in front of the class while people are still returning. The problem with giving people break in a class is you always get people who like then wander out for like 5 or 10 minutes. It's like, it's
yeah.
a thing. Okay, so looking here at, I don't know if you're still seeing my screen. Yes, you
I am,
probably are
yep.
still seeing my screen. Well, if you want to look at the screen, you can see what I've done is to create on 3.9 and 3.11, these are meetings with community, the community system groups. And the first one is going to be culture, food, jobs, and health. So those groups. And obviously we'll figure out whether you or I are in which of those. And then on the next one, it's water, energy, and emergency.
So the 3 ministers would be in culture, right?
I think that would make sense to have them in culture. Although you could suggest that, but give them the choice, because I think it's not like it wouldn't
Because
be useful to
also
have them in
Fred is on the power board, as I mentioned.
Right, you did. You did.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So we're gonna get back into it here, guys. I feel like I'm still missing a person or two, but that's okay. So again, nice job on what has been done so far, but I think we still want to flesh this out further. And I want to give you guys a minute within your groups to confer on what has been written here and what you think is good and needs work in terms of. Now you have like maybe a little bit better contextualization of what we're trying to do, sort of some internal critiques on what needs to be further developed in this. So I'll give you about, let's say about, I don't know, 5 to 7 minutes in your groups to, again, your goal here is to look at what you guys have and think about what's missing and what needs to be done as far as getting together the information that we need in order to communicate key bits of factual information to our community partners. And yeah, do you guys feel like that's enough of a charge? Yes, Taylor. Oh, just bear with it and do it here. When you start to have multiple documents, it becomes, eventually we'll definitely want to break it out and just be for groups. But to the extent that we might critique each other's stuff, I really don't want to get into having multiple documents. I mean, yeah, I'd just rather not do that. You could certainly do that, but I want us to be able to, part of this is what I would call intercalibration. We want some consistency between what we're doing in the different groups and the level of detail that we're presenting and that sort of thing, which is why I think it's useful to have it. And also a lot of this information, and the reason I created a general section up front, a lot of this information is relevant to all groups. And if it's like a basic factual piece of information related to some of these is related to all groups, please put that in the basic facts. It seems like partly because you guys were focused on your own groups, a lot of that stuff is going into the group specific stuff. But if it is something that's just a truth that's important for all groups, put it in here. And then in your system group section, put the stuff that is specific to that hazard's impact on your understanding of that group, if that makes sense. So if you're finding that you have some information that's general, which is partly why I don't want to break this stuff out, because I want us to look at this as a shared document on all of us. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Go at it. Let's go at it. And so we're going to have you guys in 7 minutes reflect back to the larger group what do you guys see as sort of like the best approach moving forward with this? Because I am going to give you kind of the rest of the week to continue working on this. And especially, we want to figure out where do we have gaps that we need to fill in, and who the heck is going to fill them in, and how are we going to fill them in? So let's go at it. If you guys want to move out there, you can do that. There's a room over here too. But please, if you guys could actually be back here in listen, I'll give you until 20 of, right? So until 8:40, I mean until 2:40. So be quick, do your thing. If you want to go someplace else, this room right next to us. I can open the door if anyone wants to work there. You guys are good. Just stay there. You'll waste too much time thinking about where to move.
Hey, John.
Yes. You're going to light out?
I
Take some drugs and go to bed.
I know. I I will. But I'm thinking about drought. And I know that your reluctance to include it has to do with a lack of data, but there's also lack of data about wind. There's also lack of data about increased precipitation in the spring.
No, my main reason for not including drought was that we've got 20% of the world's water supply right next to us.
Yeah, but that isn't necessarily going to solve it when you're looking at food supply. I mean, yes, it's an asset, but how does it?
I gotcha. Here, I'm gonna unplug you because you're talking through speakers.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, even in like the green space in Oberlin, like how do we keep vibrant, you know?
Hold on, Linda. I'm trying to find a set of headphones to listen to because I can't quite hear you right in this. Maybe I'll migrate out of the hall so I don't interrupt this group. All right. I'm in the hall now. You still hear me?
Yeah,
I don't, you know what, Linda, I don't care that much. If you really want to include drought, I don't have a problem with that.
I kind of do. I feel like it's an issue for small farmers for sure who don't have irrigation systems and then have to figure it out. And a lot of our food that's coming into like Food Hub and City Fresh and all farmers market, those are all small scale folks.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I don't have a problem with just including it. I mean, it really doesn't, like one more variable that we originally included doesn't make any difference to me. So
okay,
that's fine with me. I don't have an issue with that. I'll just tell them we are including drought.
we arm wrestled despite my feverish state.
You're right. No, I know. Yeah, I mean, you're right. That is one characteristic of our local agriculture is it really doesn't include irrigation because we've counted on. So even though we have tons of water, like, you know, out west, everyone has those, either the pivot irrigation or the rolling irrigation systems. And I've never seen any of that stuff here. Never seen an irrigation system.
All right. The only thing I've seen here are people draining the creeks. And we've thought about it, but we've just never really felt like we wanted to do that.
Are you allowed to do that?
It's been done, and it's been done by people who had this farm before us, and I don't know, honestly.
Wow.
Hey, it looks like Jesse just wrote.
Oh, you saw my long email.
I did.
I mean, I wanted to really summarize it because I just felt like it's really kind of probably a fundamental flaw.
Sure.
And also, it was kind of a summary that I figured I could just insert into our report because it's mostly just a description of our process, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, fair enough. I'm curious what she wrote.
Yeah. Well, if you want to bail, feel free to, because we're just, you know, going to do, I mean, you know, you're feel free to stay too, but it sounds like you're sick.
Oh, damn it. Got too much to do, but I don't know. At what point do you just go get a test?
Aren't you being tested regularly, or city people in some sort of like test scenario?
No, we're not. I mean, I did it myself the week before last because I was going to be with somebody and we both did it. But no, there's no ongoing testing.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's good to know if you're with your family, because I guess a lot of family members have gotten it and then not actually passed it on to their family. So it is at some level good to know, because you know, you'd think your family members are completely exposed, but my understanding is that's not actually the way it works always.
Right. Yeah, I suspect I'll be confined to a kid's room tonight.
Well, you've got some of those left, so there you go.
Yeah, sure do. I'm going to quickly open up Jesse's response.
Okay, I'm going to wander among my group, so I'm going to bail
Yeah,
on you
okay.
here just to see if they got any questions.
Good.
Right, right. Well, I think any influence you have should be based on them, but then there's also the question of how much influence do you want to include? How much you weaken your as opposed to just providing them with allow them. I think that's a great example. To me, that fact that you've gotten, they're going to be able to make all those improvements. You know what I mean? I just feel like, that one is like so clear, as opposed to one that's more like, there's going to be more, well, what would be an example of one? I just feel like in that one, like, I think anyone in your group would have made the difference you just made. Like, you would need to do that, because they would make us. What do you think?
Mm.
Right, right. Well, once they look at this one, the key system, you do so much travel. You do so much traveling. Well, the point she's making is, the thing about agriculture in this region is we do not actually have irrigation. We don't have west, everyone has those 50 irrigation systems, and they have the rural irrigation system. So even though we've got 20% of the world's fresh water, some miles north of us, that doesn't mean people have the equipment to actually drop that water from fields. Right. Right. Going back to your heating and cooling degree days, I think the point that someone brought up in the earlier class was, what sort of the transportation side of it? About someone who's bringing that about transportation, like that's part of the thing. Yeah.
Mm.
at there. It's like, and you can almost say like fact, and then say implications, colon, storage, so you're just like suggesting things that you might consider, but you're not like, you're just saying issues that might be relevant to consider, storage, transportation. These are your people discussion topics, but you're not saying there's a particular conclusion we think you should draw. Or almost just sort of like a colon and then, sequence work, or you could even underneath the bullet point say, not systems effects, but issues, colon, and then a list of issues for each. That seems like actually probably a good general principle, per page. Yeah. Yeah, right. But it's just sort of like a prompt of like, oh yeah, we could talk about that, and then they can talk about it, as opposed to you're saying, this is a real balance. We want this to be a process in which we are collecting and not reading too much.
Cool. That's good. Yeah, you probably should. Hey, good discussion going on in there. Let me. What other group are we missing? Yeah, but I think a lot of stuff. You don't have to like say it.
Yeah, missing one group, or are we missing two groups? We're just missing one group. Okay.
Yeah.
Very little. I want you guys in the, what do we call your group? We got to have group names for people, and it should be like one of your systems. It's just going to make life easier if we can refer to you guys. What are you guys? Are you guys food? You're food. Okay. You're food and water. Yeah, we'll refer to it by both names. So you guys are food and water. Food and water people, share with you the idea share with the rest of us the idea we just had, because I think it's actually a good one. Who wants to share that?
We're kind of talking about like what we were talking about earlier in class, the balance of like talking about implications versus the specific facts, and kind of came up with the idea of like after the specific facts in the source for then saying like here are some implications, kind of doing a simple list like food storage, other stuff like that.
Yeah, so it's just like a list. It's like, I don't know what the right word is, implications or impact or whatever the right word is, but we should choose a consistent word. What is the right word for that? But then it's just a colon and a list of words. Like for food, it was like transportation on that particular one, and storage, and just so it's like, it's basically priming your discussion with community members, but not leading your discussion with community members. It's like, here's some things that we could talk about, as opposed to here's some conclusions you should draw. You know what I'm saying? It seemed like a good balance anyway. Does that seem to other people like something that could work for these? Yeah, Claire, do you want to say something? Can you speak up? I can't hear you. So you'd have your source fact, and then below that, you'd have implications, colon, and you'd list the things the words that you think represent topics that your particular systems group might talk about related to it. Does that make sense? Oh no, I think it wants to relate to whatever the fact was before there. So you've got like a fact, you've got that fact sourced, and then carriage return, maybe shift carriage return, so you don't get another bullet point. So it's part of the same thing. Implications, or I don't know, what's the right word for that? Let's just say implications for a second, colon, and then a list of basically just words of things that you think prime a community discussion related to that. Like you guys were suggesting, and I thought you were maybe leading a little bit too far when you were talking about, what was it? It was something related to agriculture. What was the one you suggested when I first walked into the room? I'm just trying to remember what the point was.
Yeah,
What was the factual statement that preceded that, though?
more pests. Because it's fine.
Oh, more pests. Okay, so check it out. Implications, you could have colon pesticides. So instead of saying like your whole logic stream of that, just say that's something we might want to talk about, pesticides. You know what I'm saying? Because that feels to me a little bit less, you know, you're telling them what conclusions to draw and more, here's just a set of things we could talk about. Yeah, Claire.
I think the thing with that one is that when you just say there's going to be more higher temperatures and increasing pests, people, the only thing that's implying that that has to do with water is that it's in that section. So would we just put that into a general section, or is it like, it seems kind of necessary to mention that like it pollutes water?
I was assuming you were in the food section when you were talking about that one.
So we put the pesticides list in the water section because of agricultural runoff.
Okay. Scared you, huh? It's like Linda coming on. Yeah, I mean,
Which I think is relevant.
well, I will say there's obviously going to be overlap in these things, right? And it's not a problem that there's overlap because the groups are not actually talking to each other. So it's not a terrible thing to have. Yeah, so I don't necessarily see a problem with repeating that same factual statement in both and having, I mean, I assume for many of these things, you might repeat the same factual statement, but actually have different implication words after it. But in that case, it might be a situation in which you include the same as one of your words is the same in both of them. You know what I'm saying? I think that's totally good. All right, other things that other groups talked about that we should check in on. Ideas, thoughts, yes.
I think our group is talking a lot about something we were talking about in class today, which is we have good ideas for how like our systems and hazards are related to each other, but we don't necessarily have a lot of data on like specifically what might happen in Berlin with those things.
Right.
And so we want to try to like see if we can find more sources for things like that.
Right. I think, by the way, like obviously the climate, the national climate assessment data is general. It's obviously not specific to Oberlin. I think that's totally fine because obviously those general Midwest things are happening in Oberlin. So I don't see it in any way. And you're like, obviously what we're going to find about specific climate stuff in Oberlin is only what we get from the downscaling. We're not going to find anything else except what we got from the downscaling data. So everything else is going to be general to the Midwest, and that's 100% fine. I don't see any problem. Is that, am I answering your question or addressing your comment? Okay, good.
Can I just add to that?
Oh, you're still there.
I am still here. I just can't break away. That is exactly what Jesse suggested for areas that we don't have Oberlin specific data, is to go with the NCA data.
I think that's great, but I really hope that someone, and this is one of the things, we've only got a minute left, but I almost feel like maybe we want to assign these things to, like, so far we're taking this approach of we're doing this from the perspective of your groups. And that makes a lot of sense in terms from your community system groups. But I almost feel like we want to assign maybe some groups to just say, see what you can find on wind and put it in everyone's. If you find something on wind, you know, stick it in everyone's and see what you can find on disease. You know, are you guys up for doing that? And how would we do that? What's the way we would do that? Are there groups that would be willing to take on disease and wind?
Are those like two you feel like we don't have a lot on right now? Or
I don't feel like we got much on wind. I haven't given a careful look, but I don't see much on wind in there. Does anyone feel like they were finding a lot of good wind data?
I think like it was like there was something in one of the assignments that was like there isn't like any here in.
That's why I feel like it's so absurd that they're putting in that chart something about its probability when they don't have data. It's like, no, that's not what you should do. You should put, I don't know. Not, you know, we're assigning it some risk. Yeah, Jane.
right? Well, we are kind of accepting that we're trying to shoehorn ourselves into this framework of ICLEI where we are looking at climate hazards, 7 climate hazards, 8 climate hazards now that Linda has added drought back in. So we're back on 8. Linda says we should do 8. 8 climate hazards, 7 systems. We're looking at the convergence of those. That's what we're doing. So you're going to have to figure out how to shoehorn it in, Jane. It has to fit into that matrix. What's that? I'm still not quite hearing you. Yeah, you have to do that, I guess. You have to stick, if you have a fact that seems to be relevant to culture, stick it into one of the hazards. All right, we have run down time. So next class, keep plugging away on this, play around with temperate as part of what you do for next class, and we're gonna keep plugging away. But I'm gonna next class let you guys sort of present, let each group kind of present on what they think the key, the key facts are within each of them, and we'll use that as a basis for trying to identify what's still missing. Cool. Linda, go to bed.
I'm in bed.
Oh, okay.
All right, John, I
Yeah.
forwarded you the Bob Hamner thing.
Oh, okay. I'll link that. Great.
Great. All right.
Okay. Take care. Feel better.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. You guys take care.